Hello, and we are live. I think we're going to wait a couple of minutes just so that everyone's kind of got time to get in before the session starts. But obviously, I am Daisy, I'm HackerJob's marketing lead, and I'm joined today by Phil, who's our head of talent, and Darren, who is our lead account manager and head of CSM.
Hello. Feels weird because we do this every week, so the introduction always sounds like we're brand new people, but me and Phil are on every week, so.
I know, you're old hands now.
Yeah, exactly.
Always good to be back. But yeah, I think we've got some exciting things coming up in the rest of the week as well, right? Thursday, I think we've got another webinar coming out.
So we've got our podcast on Thursday with Jatinder from Funding Circle. He is their head of tech there, their head of technical recruiting. And yeah, it's going to be a really good episode. So he's kind of talking about how you kind of build credibility as a recruiter, how you kind of get that buy-in from the top. So, you know, obviously with everything that's going on right now, currently, the kind of pandemic and stuff, he kind of speaks about how, you know, a lot of recruitment teams have been furloughed, but how you can kind of build that kind of confidence and trust and not just be like that kind of typical recruiter. Like you can definitely kind of build that buy-in with the C-suite stuff, with the C-suite team and stuff. So yeah, it's a really interesting episode. And he also talks all about like streaming services, like everything that he's watching at the moment and stuff. So yeah, it's quite a good one.
Nice.
Yeah.
Look forward to it.
I think when we started the podcast, we didn't realise quite how relevant a lot of the topics that we recorded pre other stuff that's going on would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of fallen in nicely, and then obviously next week we've got another one of these that it's going to be fun. That I need to start writing that today. But what we'll be going through is AWS, I guess, in relation to DevOps and like the landscape. So I'll also be talking about a common argument, and I had an interesting webinar a couple of weeks ago with Vodafone, where is DevOps a job title or is it a methodology? Which is something you often see in the industry and other people arguing about. And then we'll go through some kind of common misconceptions around AWS as a focus, because AWS we see as being the main player in that kind of cloud market. It's very similar to this one. So it should be good.
Lovely. Looking forward to it already.
I like your mug, Darren. Is that your work Star Wars mug?
It's my work Star Wars mug. It was the only thing I took from the office.
Oh.
So this reminds me of the good old days where we actually saw each other face to face.
Where we could, you know, you'd be within a certain distance from each other.
Exactly. Well, I feel close to you guys because we have so many video calls. So.
Yeah, to be honest, I probably see you guys more now that we're not in the office than I did in the office. In the office, I was head down and working kind of thing. We do so many webinars and all sorts of things these days. I probably do get more face-to-face time with you guys these days, I think.
I had 7 hours of video calls yesterday.
You what?
I had 7 hours of video calls yesterday. I worked out. Yeah.
Brutal when that.
It was a long day.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Don't know when we want to kick this off.
Yeah, should we get started now?
We may
Cool.
Definitely.
Okay, so today we're obviously talking through deconstructing role briefs, in particular JavaScript and React. So housekeeping. So first of all, our Slack group is now live. We will add all new attendees to the Slack group. You will receive an invitation later this week / early next week. It kind of depends on when Slack lets us add more people to the group, but we are definitely on that. And also when asking questions, if you please add to all participants. And also, if you have any other further questions around your own kind of interview processes and any kind of advice that you're looking for, please drop them in the Q&A and we will try and answer them at the end. We've kind of allocated a bit more time at the end for Q&A this week. You'll also be invited to a new Zoom webinar each week. These invites come automatically via Zoom. So please email hello@hackerjob.co if you have any issues at all. And make sure to tell your friends. So obviously we post this series on YouTube. We're on Twitter at hackerjob.co. We're on LinkedIn via hackerjob. And you can always use the hashtags TRT and tech recruitment training. So the course plans, obviously we've already covered off modern Java and full stack Node.js. So yeah, this week we are going with front end React, which is very exciting. And Phil is going to take us through that. And Darren is going to be here to help facilitate any questions that anyone has. So yeah, let's get started, Phil.
Great. So Dilbert seems to be a bit of a tradition when we're going through these. So yeah, just a little joke there about I guess it's a little bit dated, to be honest. I don't think Flash and JavaScript are the most up-to-date technologies, as we'll be coming on to. We'll be going through React as we go through. But as always, Dilbert's boss not quite understanding the technical jargon that he's throwing out there. Cool.
So today's agenda, so obviously we are going to go through a recap of JavaScript. We are going to be looking at deconstructing the tech, the skills, experience and salary, and the overall interview process.
Yeah, 100%. Just on the interview process. So we've been through our kind of best practice for interview process, I think, over the last 2 weeks. So if anyone wants that advice, please do go back and listen to the Modern Java or the Node.js presentations. But yeah, as Daisy touched on there, if you have any advice, or if you want any advice or any questions specific to your process, or what do we think about this type of task and things like that, then please do get them over to us, and we'll do our best to get some advice around that. So these first couple of slides will be familiar to you if you tuned in for series 1 when we looked at front end in general. So thought it's good to do a quick recap on that. So front end is essentially the look and feel of an application. So it's what you can see and interact with on a website or an application. It's the interface essentially. It links together the world of design and technology. So if you've got your design team, obviously UI developers, user experience developers, possibly product managers, project managers, everyone who's involved at that initial design stage, as well as the developers, of course, because you've got to make sure that what you're designing is actually feasible. It's all great designing the best looking web page in the world. You need to make sure that your team have the tools and the capabilities to build what you want. And then, as I said, that back end world of databases and architecture and all of this sort of stuff that we've gone over during all of our back-end presentations. Front-end development is the link between those two. And it's also known as client-side development because it's the side that the client sees. It's the side that the client interacts with, or the user. It's dependent, obviously, the nature of your site. Cool. So there's a few different kind of personas within front-end development. So there are design-focused, mainly focused on HTML, CSS, typically from some sort of design background, so that might be a graphic designer, and they're really focused on the purely visual element of things. So HTML and CSS are obviously fairly basic front-end languages. So HTML is essentially, ordering things on the page and structuring the web page. CSS is essentially your first layers of color. So very, very simple web pages, going back 10, 15 years, built in purely HTML and CSS. Very static. You might have some pictures, you'll have some text here, you'll have different colors and things like that, but nothing really doing anything particularly interesting, moving or sliding or any sort of effects that you'll see on kind of a modern interface, not necessarily just a web page and an interface. The majority of that will be built using JavaScript, which is the second category we're looking at here, the web-focused modern software engineer. And then there's also a kind of computer science-focused algorithmic side to it as well, mainly focused around kind of Node.js. But yeah, for today, we're focusing on the modern front-end skill set. Cool. So already kind of took you guys through this very, very briefly. So the structure and the look are the kind of antecedents, the initial technology. And then JavaScript has obviously brought those interactions into play. And today we'll be mainly focused on React. I'll give you a quick update on Angular, Vue, and Ember as well. But React is the one that we're focusing on. React is the one that we're seeing the most sought after in the market. It's definitely taken over Angular in the last year or so. I think they were quite even at a point not too long ago. But we're seeing React is very much taken over. And we'll come on to it, but it's essentially JavaScript Spring or .NET Core. So what Spring is to Java, what .NET Core is to C#, where it's a really comprehensive framework that adds a lot of functionality. That's kind of what React does. It has lots of different components that allow you to do lots of things. Cool. So in terms of a quick recap, so in terms of the most modern version of JavaScript, that would be ES10, released in, or otherwise known as ES 2019. So that was released in December 2019. We'll come on to the version history in a second. Frameworks, React, Angular, Vue being probably the three most common. But honestly, like, name a noun, and there is probably a JavaScript framework. So you take a noun, you put JS on the end, chances are you've named a JavaScript framework. So some less common but very interesting ones, and I will share this in the Slack group afterwards, would be Currency.js, which is a really quick way if you're looking to add a kind of currency converter to your website and things like that. It does basically all the work for you. There is Last.js, Fastify.js, Draggable.js, Mousetrap.js, honestly, and this is just one list of kind of 15 interesting frameworks that I will share, because they've got some really interesting use cases. But then there's also the kind of funny ones as well. So there is a JS framework called Thanos.js, which was basically built as a joke, which it was released on the pretext that it'll reduce your file size of your project down to 50%. So obviously sounds great on the surface. It's going to massively reduce the file size. We'll have a lot less data to be storing and dealing with. The way it does that is by randomly deleting half of your files. So not the best to be kind of suggesting your manager brings on. But again, I'll share this in the Slack channel afterwards. There's some really funny ones, some funny names, some that definitely aren't safe for the webinar. So I'll let you guys go through that in your own time. But yeah, it's JavaScript, I think, is probably the most user-led language in the world, in that I think they're the most individual frameworks built by people on all sorts of corners of the globe. So it's really nice. It's a global project. There's people adding to it from all corners of the earth. Some really valuably with Currency.js, some not so valuably with Thanos.js. But it's a really interesting community, and I think when you're looking on GitHub and things like that, you'll see it's by far the most popular language across the Git projects. And I think that's why when you're looking at JS developers, it's useful to be looking at a kind of portfolio of them and things like that. Again, we'll come on to that in a little while. Testing wise, Jasmine, Mocha, and Jest are probably the three most popular, but there are a lot more out there as well. And then what are you looking for in terms of what really makes a good candidate turn into a great candidate? Well, any design knowledge, probably not mandatory, because they aren't necessarily like UX, UI designers. They aren't necessarily graphic designers. Like, they are still developers, they are still technical, but obviously any design knowledge is gonna make them a little bit better, given how closely they work with that design team. Single page applications, we'll come on to in a little while, but again, very sought after. And then, as with any developer, any knowledge of DevOps as a culture, as a process, any knowledge of how their code is going to interact with containers in the cloud is obviously going to be very important. Any knowledge of kind of big data, again, we've covered it so many times, but with the modern approach to development and data streaming, so real-time streaming, if you imagine Netflix and Amazon Prime and all of this sort of stuff, well, they all have a very nice interface as well. It's all a single page application, so it's you're scrolling down one page, all the different recommendations appear. Like, that's all working, and all housed within the front end. So yes, front end isn't necessarily associated with big data in the same way maybe Java is or Python is, where you're actually able to use it as a language to complete a lot of that functionality. Just through the modern kind of ecosystem, let's say, they still have a hell of a huge relationship, particularly if you're looking at single page applications, because they are feeding real-time data into an application and housing that on the interface, which again, explains why databases would be pretty sought after. Darren, I don't know if you'd add anything to that at all?
No, I think that was, I've stayed quiet because it's so conclusive on everything. It's great.
Sweet. And then, yeah, red flags wise, I think TypeScript. And just a caveat again, when we say red flags, like, these aren't always red flags. Sometimes you will be looking for a combination of JS, React, and some of these skill sets, in which case they're definitely not. But if you are looking for a JavaScript React developer, some of the things that might, either put you off them in terms of their caliber, or maybe send you off down the wrong track, would be looking at kind of Angular and TypeScript. There are a lot of similarities, and the learning curve I don't think is too big, to be honest. I think maybe a little bit too much is made of the learning curve at times. But having said that, if you do want someone to come in and start coding immediately in JS and React, then maybe you do want to avoid that Angular TypeScript experience. Candidates who've mainly worked with kind of the UI, wireframes, WordPress, and again, more of that kind of design element, they might not have the level of JavaScript and React that you're looking for. Again, it's about really qualifying that. As always, fixes, monitoring, tickets, and support don't tend to have worked. If a developer has mainly been doing that, they possibly haven't worked on the most complex projects, maybe haven't seen all of the things you would need them to see to bring them into your business. Full stack developers, just because someone is using JavaScript and React doesn't mean they could go in and use that 100% of the time. If they're a full stack C# developer that's using a bit of React, it's always very important to quantify, like, what's their split? How often are they using front-end technologies? How often are they using the back-end technologies? More often than not, it's weighted towards the back end. I think the common, and it's very hard to say this, but I think the common split is kind of 70% back end, 30% front end when you're speaking to developers and kind of saying, look, if you could quantify your time. So if you need someone to come in and hit the ground running, be fully front end, one, you need to qualify, are they actually able to do that? And then secondly, and I think this is even more important, is are they interested in that? Do they actually want to be a front end developer? Because a lot of them are back end devs that have then learned a bit of front end. They might not necessarily want to move on to the front end. They might enjoy the back end development. So again, it's important to really qualify that from the offset. Java and JavaScript, I think we've covered enough times. And then React Native is mobile focused, whereas React, so React Native is associated with React, but just because you know React Native does not necessarily mean you can come in and use all of the React components that the business might want you to use.
And I guess just to build on one of your points just then on full stack, Phil, it's also the opposite. So there's a lot of front end devs that have specifically decided to move into front end. So they come from like a web development background. They probably don't want to do back end. You'll see some clients will look for someone who's very front end focused, but also has the back end. I don't know about you, Phil, if you would disagree, but I think if you are looking for someone to be full stack, you are more likely to have got them from a back end role and move full stack than someone that came from a front end role and then moved full stack, unless you are looking at Node, which isn't a programming language. It's more of a like code environment. So you may find it in Node, but you don't often find, for example, a React candidate that suddenly will decide that they want to learn Java. You're more likely to get a Java candidate that wants to go full stack and will learn React. Yeah,
100%. I'd agree, and I think that carries on from the full. It's very common you see a full stacker who's 80% front end, 20% back end kind of thing. Like it's mainly back end heavy, and I think because of that, yes, it's back end devs that are learning front end. You don't see people often moving backwards. So yeah, definitely important to flag. Cool.
So we're going to talk now through deconstructing the tech.
Awesome. So modern versions of JavaScript are ES6 and above. I'll come on to ES6 in a little while, but I think that was released in 2015 off the top of my head. The modern framework we're focusing on is React. There are probably developers out there pulling their hair out and saying, why are you not discussing Vue as the modern framework? Why are you not discussing Angular and TypeScript as the modern framework? Like, they're just as modern, they're just as applicable. And yeah, they will be in certain ways, but what the market is telling us at the moment is that React is by far the most in demand. And from doing a little bit of research, it is the most comprehensive. So it's got the most different kind of features within it. So Vue and Angular fans out there, I'm sure, the development community is doing what it can to kind of catch up. But what we're seeing on the market at the moment is React is by far the most in demand.
And I think it semi comes down. Sorry, mate. I think it semi comes down to where is your company's main base and where is the main tech house sitting. So if you are a company that is based out in Paris, I know in France, Vue is huge. So Vue is much more heavily used in France than it is used in the UK. So if you are a French company that have come to the UK, maybe Vue is something that you need. But in that circumstance, you probably want to look outside of it. But we heavily see that React, both in the UK and in the US, is the heaviest used framework.
Yeah, 100%. And it's been quite a recent shift. I don't know if you'd agree, but I think a year and a half ago, I think you heard, you know, a desire for Angular or React as much as anything, whereas that really does seem to have faded over the last year, I think.
Yeah, and I think when we get onto the point of going through the numbers, you are slowly seeing that shift away from more 50-50 to it's probably getting towards 60% React towards against Angular like skill set in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. We'll look at single page applications, and then we'll have a quick look at the testing tools and methodologies associated. Great. So the two LTS versions, the two recent LTS versions, sorry, are ES5 and ES6. So ES5 was released in 2009. It's a little bit confusing that it then jumps to ES6. That doesn't mean there weren't versions released in between. They just kind of renamed everything when they released ES6. So it added various features that basically increased the capacity of what you could do with JavaScript at that time. But the big leap forward, which we'll come on to now, was ES6, which is 2015. Cool. So in a nutshell, ES6 or ES 2015 is a batch of features that passed stage 4 on the diagram we can see there as per the 2015 milestone. So the way it works with JavaScript is you have stage 0, which is obviously the idea. So that's whether they are working for a company that supports JavaScript development. So React, for example, was developed by Facebook. So whether it's a commercial thing, or it could just be someone personally working on a new framework or what have you. From stage 0 is the inception of the idea. There's then the proposal, the draft, the candidate, so essentially a prototype, and then we say that feature set is ready to be released. JavaScript works on a a yearly release cycle. So essentially the way it works is through that year, any ideas that get to stage 4, by the time you're going to release the latest version, they'll go into that version of JS. Anything that doesn't quite make it to stage 4 in time will be pushed into the next year's short-term release cycle. So ES6 is the sixth big sort of LTS edition of ECMA script, otherwise known as JavaScript. As I said, standardized in 2015, and it brings in lots of engrossing features that weren't kind of used in a lot of the earlier versions. So ES5 was really prone to kind of common misunderstanding errors, and because of that, kind of a lot of workarounds were created. So TypeScript became very popular in the .NET world. CoffeeScript became very popular in the kind of Ruby world, because they were all trying to work out ways that you could get around the common misunderstanding errors in ES5, so JavaScript's previous LTS. Basically, both TypeScript and CoffeeScript provided what they call syntactic sugar on top of ES5, and then it basically compiled all of that into JavaScript. So it's essentially like you're dusting some sugar over the top of that JavaScript code, and it kind of transformed it and fixed the errors and made it work a little bit. But obviously that is then adding complexity to what you need to do. You're not having to just write it once, you then have to use another language to kind of fix it, essentially. So that's where ES6 came along. It fixed a lot of those common misunderstandings, and I think from that point onwards, so from 2015 onwards, JavaScript's really gone kind of from strength to strength. Cool. So in terms of some of the modules of ES6, these are a few of the features that were released. So arrows were released, so they're a shorthand function using essentially an arrow syntax. Basically, it brought it up to speed with what was being done in C#, Java 8, which, if we remember back to 2 weeks ago, was the real kind of epiphany point for Java, where that really became a modern software language. As well as CoffeeScript. So it basically brought JavaScript up to the level of a lot of other languages at the time. They introduced classes, so having a conducive declarative pattern that made class patterns painless, and basically boosted the interoperability of them. And then it enhanced the object literals as well. So essentially increased the ease of creating prototypes. Prototypes are obviously very important within JavaScript, because you're prototyping what the user is going to see. And obviously part of the testing process is mimicking user behavior. So you need to be able to create those prototypes you know, easily, quickly, without having completed the whole code base, essentially, because you don't want to write everything and then, you know, look at it and go, actually, that's not going to work. You need to be able to prototype as you're going through, so you can be checking things as you're going through. Cool. So yeah, modules were released as well. So they provide a course to load and manage dependencies through the new import-export keywords. So again, when we talk about modern software engineering and kind of load balancing and dependencies, so different parts of the system that depend on each other and how you balance the load. So how you balance your resources and the data that you're having to stream through the system. The modules basically increased the ease of doing that. And then they released block scoping as well. So ES5 lacked a very essential feature of block scoping, which massively kind of deranked it in comparison to ES6. And again, you can achieve better block scoping with ES6 using the let keyword. So they allowed a lot more keywords into the system, so a lot more commands could be used, which massively kind of brought it into the modern software engineering world in 2015. Cool. And then just to give you a quick update there, we're not going to go into too much depth on these because I know, you know, it gets a little bit technical at times, but yeah, just to show that they have been releasing a short-term supported version every year. ES10 was released in 2019 in December, so we'd be due, unless, I don't know, the pandemic may have slowed things down, may have sped things up, who knows. In theory, we should be due ES11 in December 2020.
Exciting.
Yeah. Cool. So React itself. So React provides basically the best possible rendering performance of any kind of framework within JavaScript. Its strength basically comes from the focus on individual components. So instead of kind of working on an entire web app, React.js allows you to break down like a really complex UI into simpler components. So if you imagine even like a single page application, if you imagine Netflix's interface, obviously that's incredibly complex when you're trying to look at that as a whole. But if you can break that down into various different modules, then obviously you can make it a little bit easier to really fine tune certain elements of it. And then obviously you have to make sure that they all work together. So it's open source, which is great. Obviously you can add, the wider community can be adding to it. And it's basically used primarily for building user interfaces, specifically for single page applications. So again, that kind of gives you some insight into why it is so popular these days. I think most companies are looking for single page applications, and it's used for handling the view layer of the web and mobile apps. So we'll touch on React Native, which is obviously the mobile version of it, but essentially it's controlling what the user will see. So it's really kind of fulfilling that initial purpose, I guess, of JavaScript. Not going to go into too much detail into all the components of React because honestly there are hundreds. But in terms of some insight into some of the different features, so we've got React Admin, which is a library suitable for building B2B admin applications on top of kind of REST APIs or GraphQL APIs. It's customizable by design. So, typically people think of JavaScript and React, they think of really pretty web pages, and they think of, again, Netflix or something like that, where it's really slick. Well, actually, every interface, or not every interface, but most of the interfaces in the world will be using JavaScript, whether that's your, even your CRM or your ATS or whatever it is you're working with, probably will have a layer of JavaScript based on what you're seeing. And obviously, the slicker they can make that, the more user-friendly they can make that, the easier it is for businesses to use. So it's not just about, those commercial web pages and those really slick-looking sites that we're talking about. Also has a lot of use, within the B2B world. Blueprint. So the React components and Blueprint are mainly used for desktop applications. So they're particularly suitable for building like complex, data-dense interfaces. So again, kind of moves away from that artistic kind of graphics focused world of JavaScript, and shows that actually You know, by building a really complex interface and a very complex on the back end, but easy to use on the front end, you can actually simplify a lot of kind of data intensive tasks and things like that. So it does have a lot of use cases across the globe.
Just before we move on to the next one, Phil, I've realised that TRT has made a, we're not perfect, so ES11, because they're actually not on a December cycle, they're on a June cycle. So okay. ES7 was released in June this year, so last month the latest version of ES was released.
Oh, fair. Well, yeah, happy to be correct. Maybe it's this month then, because I think there was definitely a release, I think, on the 23rd or the 22nd of December last year. So maybe it's a STS with a 6-month cycle, yeah. And they released like an update essentially. But yeah, no, nice one. Thanks for the correction. Cool. So Shards is an open source modern React UI toolkit. It's built from scratch, geared towards fast performance. So if you need a really fast performing UI, maybe you've got, you know, high levels of RTS and you really do need the data to be updated in real time. There's React virtualized. So that's basically if you're building a front end that's data heavy, React virtualized might be the library that you need to dip into. Includes various different components for effectively rendering large lists, tables, grids. So again, even within that world of kind of data science, there's an application of React in there. You know, if you can work with your data scientists on their virtualizations to make them slicker and work faster, then obviously that's going to massively improve your data team within the business as well. So I think it's definitely time to not think about React and JavaScript just as like web pages and design and all of this sort of stuff. Like there are a lot of really cool use cases across all sorts of different types of development. And then the final two I'll look at for now are Onsen UI. We're going to come on to that on the next slide, so I'll just touch on it briefly. But basically, it's used for creating cross-platform mobile apps. So obviously, we've already touched on virtualizations. We've touched on desktop apps. We've touched on mobile apps. We've touched on apps that maybe need incredibly fast data streams. So you know, it's a really complex world that suits a lot of use cases. And then finally, React Suite. Is basically perfect for enterprise systems. So, you know, they are covering off a lot of bases there in the very similar way to Spring with Java, where there's various different features within Spring that work very well for different use cases, different business cases, all of that sort of stuff. React is very similar in that it has lots of complexity within an umbrella framework. Cool. Just quickly, so you'll have noticed on the last slide, Onsen is used for mobile development. And then you may be thinking, I thought React Native was the mobile form of React. So they are both used for mobile development. React Native, as we'll come on to, has a lot more kind of use cases, but Onsen uses HTML5 and it works with Angular, React, Vue, Meteor, or pure JavaScript, so very JS focused. Helps you develop both hybrid and web apps, basically in conjunction with Cordova and PhoneGap. So while Onsen is good, you do have to use it in conjunction with other technologies, and it is restricted to kind of Angular, React, Vue, Meteor, whereas React Native is write once, run anywhere, similar to Kotlin. So it doesn't need as many rewrites and tweakings for different systems. It enables you to build world-class application experiences on native platforms, using a consistent kind of developer experience based on JavaScript and React. So while it is purely focused on React, the code you write in React Native is then obviously transformed into machine language and can be read by various different systems. So actually, although Onsen on the surface looks like maybe it's a bit more flexible because it works with Angular, React, and Vue, and Meteor, React Native, I think, is by far the better choice if you are looking to develop a mobile app using JavaScript and React. And then, as we said there, Facebook uses React Native in multiple production apps, and will continue to investing in React Native. So, yeah, got to be doing something right.
And I think the interesting thing from what I understand of Onsen, and I'll be honest, I'm not an expert, is I see Onsen kind of where React Native was 2 or 3 years ago, where React Native had a lot of limitations at one point, where it has evolved a lot. So it'll be interesting to see where Onsen goes in the next 2 years, and does it catch up, and some of the feature set that isn't there at the moment suddenly appears. So it's good. I think Onsen is going to be an interesting segment within React in the future.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what all this shows is often when companies are saying I need JavaScript and React, that's perhaps a bit too surface level.
Yeah.
It's a bit like Java and Spring. Typically, what companies need is Spring Boot, because more often than not, they're looking for someone to build microservices. So if someone has Spring Security or Spring Data experience, it's relevant, don't get me wrong, but it might not be exactly what they're looking for. And I think often what we hear is, oh yeah, we need JS and React. Great, okay, but what React components are you using? What do you need them to be familiar with within that? So I think sometimes maybe, challenging your hiring managers and asking specifically what is it you need them to do with React, and are there specific components that I should be looking for? Because then, you can, particularly if you're recruiting in London, you can go on LinkedIn or whichever sources you're using, and you can find 200, 300, 400 developers using React. But if you had that extra level of complexity, you might bring up the 5 or the 10 that have been using React in the exact way that you want them to. So I think understanding what components your company is using, I would say is very important.
And I also think to some extent that it also, when you understand the components that you're looking to use, and that it gives you a bit more indication, you can go, okay, so looking for something Onsen, actually, and I don't know if this is the case, but actually Angular has a component as well that's very similar to Onsen. If we were able to look at Angular as well, because of this component, it means that the market will open up even more. So it gives you a little bit more strength. And what I think that we're all guilty of it within the market. We are the ones that have got a better view of what is going on than a hiring manager does. So in reality, if you can use that knowledge to impart it on the hiring manager, it probably opens up your search a little bit more and makes your job much easier. And we all know that hiring tech is very, very hard. So you want to give yourself as much opportunity as you can.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Yeah, and we do touch on this in the mobile presentation. So again, always saying this, but please feel free to go back to series 1 and listen into the deep dive into mobile. But the bottom line right now, anyway, is that a native iOS and Android solution is still the best choice for projects in which experience and performance have absolute priority. So there are still marginal benefits, like I would say, to using native tech. But if your budget's limited and basically a reasonable UX and performance is acceptable for now, it's no one wants reasonable to be their end goal. But if reasonable performance is the first step towards getting to exceptional, then React Native, I would say, is definitely worth considering, because you can deploy it onto all platforms. And I would think alongside Kotlin, I think it probably is the mobile development language for at least the next few years, until the next big thing comes along. Cool. So I said I'd obviously give some honourable mentions to some of the frameworks that we're not touching on. So AngularJS is a structural framework for dynamic web apps. So it lets you use HTML again, similar to Onsen, as your template language. Lets you extend HTML syntax to express your application's components clearly and succinctly. It's very good for kind of data binding and dependency injections. So there are certain use cases where Angular would come out on top, but I think what I would say is React are adding new components all the time. And it seems like what they've managed to do is start to cover off some of those weaknesses when, a lot of the things that maybe you couldn't do in React that you could do in Angular at a certain point have now kind of been blended into the later updates of React. So it does seem to be taking over the market a little bit in that sense. And I think the big difference is AngularJS is based on MVC model, so model view controller. Again, we've touched on that a few times in earlier presentations, so I'm not going to go over that again. Whereas React is based on a virtual DOM, a virtual DOM, sorry. In terms of the difference, basically it means React can act a little bit quicker than Angular on a very basic level. Vue. So Vue is a progressive JavaScript framework, and it's used for building interfaces. Unlike some of the other kind of popular frameworks, it's not backed by any big tech company. So I mean that that is a big difference. I think it's like I don't know, it's like wine. The most recognized brand doesn't necessarily mean it's the tastiest. So if you do have the backing of a Facebook or a Google like Angular and Facebook React, sorry, then obviously you do have a lot of weight in the market instantly. So I think Vue, to get to the level it has, like you say, Darren, very popular in France, has to have a lot of great functionality about it. Without having that backing and that advertisement from a big tech company. So I think it definitely is still one for the future, but in terms of the availability of talent and the companies using it, we've not seen it onboarded too heavily just yet. And then finally, another one which does seem to be fading a little bit is Ember. So again, it's an open source JS framework, which helps developers to create scalable single page web applications, so SPAs. But on the other hand, React is very much moving into that market and very much kind of dominating that market of single page applications. Cool. So yeah, as we see here, a lot of the apps I've mentioned already. So Netflix being one, but also Facebook, Google Maps, Gmail, Twitter, Google Drive, GitHub. Anything that's kind of updating as you're using it. So maybe you're scrolling down the page and new things are appearing. Maybe it's interacting with you as you're going. Essentially, the whole application, the whole page, sorry, is an application. I think we touched on them again in series 1. So rather than having, essentially your server here in your data, your architectural layer, and the front end essentially just being a face and having to send signals back to request certain data that then goes back to the front end. If you remember our analogy of the human body, obviously you've got the interface as the face, the brain being essentially the back end, and then the database being the memory. It kind of cuts that system out, and you create an application that is basically the single page. So all of the data that you need and all the requests for data are housed within that front end, as well as some of the back end logic. So it's standalone. It doesn't require, it's not dependent. So you're removing dependencies on other parts of the system, which obviously means you can then create much kind of faster acting and much more interactive web pages, which is obviously very much the future. Again, going back to real-time streaming, things like that. Now that the front end has to handle much higher volumes of data much quicker than ever before, it needs that extra level of complexity. So what it also means is you can use the same API across all of your applications. Rather than having to access different APIs, you can essentially attach the API to all of your single page applications. You stop making what are called round trips to the server. Since you only take the data when you need it, you request the data at one time rather than having a continuous loop going there. You can separate different features a lot more easily. So if one feature isn't really performing well or isn't working too well, it's a standalone application, so you can kind of fix it a little bit easier. And essentially, it's making it easier to use, quicker, and more stable in the long term. So they're very much where the market is moving, and React, with its focus on kind of UIs, is very much kind of the go-to framework for building single page applications. Cool. So testing, as we've touched on, just a quick refresh on what it is. So testing frameworks is a set of guidelines and rules used for creating and designing test cases. So sometimes test frameworks are actual tools like Selenium and WebDriver and things like that. Selenium WebDriver, sorry. Other times it's your approach, but essentially what it is, it's how are we going to plan these tests, and how are we going to ensure that the application works. Unit testing, we've touched on numerous times, so breaking your code down into various units and testing each one of those. TDD is writing the unit test before the code, so it's essentially like spell check. Rather than writing your whole essay, then going back and spell checking the whole thing, you're allowing it to flag up the errors as you go, and you're fixing them as you go. So when you get to the end, it's all well written. And then BDD, so behavior-driven development. It's the process of more collaborative working between tech and non-tech to ensure the project meets business needs. So it's essentially the testing process that goes hand in hand with DevOps. So like your integration tests and things like that would kind of be housed under a behavior-driven development umbrella. Cool. So the main JS testing tools are Mocha, Jest, Jasmine, and Chai. The ones that we're going to focus on mainly today is Jest. That seems to be the go-to for React. With Mocha more node focused. Jasmine has applications with React, definitely, but kind of sits within that integration testing world. And Chai, to be honest, I'm sure you can use it with React. It's not something that's come up too heavily when I've been researching the testing tools for React, though. Cool. So in terms of the go-to tools, so there are some actually that I couldn't find logos for, so that's why they're not on here. But there's WebDriver IO, which can be used for either Node.js or React. Makes it possible to write super easy Selenium WebDriver tests for JavaScript, and you can factor in both BDD or TDD as your framework there. So really, really interesting. Nightwatch.js, again, focused on Node.js or React, but it's based on end-to-end testing. So essentially testing the application right from one into the other. And then Nightmare.js is another quite common one, which is very similar to Phantom.js, which, to be honest, is something that I know I used to see on a lot of CVs when I was working the JavaScript market. So it seems like it's kind of taken over from Phantom.js. It's basically a high-level browser automation test tool. So testing for applications that are browser based, like your single page applications. But then the main ones that you'll see, so Jest is the tool that's used by Facebook to test all of their JavaScript code, including all of their React applications, including all their React modules. Jest philosophy is to provide a zero configuration experience. So what that means is very, very easy to use. Shouldn't mean that the engineer has to configure it to different types of code. So yeah, really, really applicable to lots of different code bases. Mocha, so while Jest's really popular amongst Facebook developers to write automated tests for React, it does have some issues. It's quite slow when it looks at mock testing. So Mocha has actually become a very popular alternative to Jest for React as well. Protractor, that's the other logo you can kind of see there on the screen, is used for acceptance testing. So it is mainly an Angular tool built on top of Selenium, but it is possible to configure it to work with React as well. And basically it'll allow you to test your application against a wide variety of different browsers. And then the final one is Enzyme. So Enzyme's a JS testing utility for React. Basically makes it easier to kind of assert, manipulate, and traverse your React components output. So again, it allows you to focus in on which components are performing better, worse, and really kind of highlight which issues which areas you may need to focus your development on.
So is there a compromise, Phil?
There's always a compromise, I think. So I think in terms of versions, a lot of companies are very focused on ES6 and above, just given that it is 5 years old now. So if you do have developers that aren't familiar with ES6, then essentially the JavaScript they're writing is over 5 years old. That's not to say I would discount them at all. It's not a massive learning curve. And people do get unlucky. You end up working in a company that is using legacy tech, then that's not necessarily your fault, but I would make sure that was the case. And what I would want to have seen from them is that they've been upskilling in their personal time. Like, if you want passionate developers in your business, then they should want to know about the most modern versions. So I wouldn't put it as a black mark against someone if the company they've been working with hadn't been using it, but I probably would mark them down in my estimations if they hadn't made any effort to learn and upskill in their spare time. I don't know if you'd agree, Darren?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that tech or development in particular is a market where you can't assume that you're going to learn everything in your day-to-day. If you're not doing stuff outside of your day-to-day, then you are going to fall behind quite quickly, because you are reliant to some extent, and this is a problem that I think is the case across a lot of the tech market. You are reliant on your company updating the tech that they're using, and that's a very expensive feat at times to move from one area to another. So yeah, I think that the most important thing for me is looking for a development team that are interested in and passionate about upskilling themselves, because that shows that as you move along, they're going to be adaptable.
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, from a framework perspective, again, it's, you know, we say this every week. I think the learning curve of learning a new framework, if you're already a competent and experienced JavaScript developer, isn't huge. I think it depends how many do you need to hire in the team, because obviously, you know, if you've got a team of 10, you don't want all of them necessarily to be learning React. You probably are going to want people coming in that do have that experience, but is there a room for maybe 3 or 4 of those to be upskilling from Vue or a different framework or a different kind of skill set within JavaScript? Potentially. That'll very much depend on your business needs and how quickly you need things done, I guess. Yep. But yeah, I think there's absolutely, you know, no reason that someone who's competent with JS, even if it's within a Node environment, couldn't learn React within a fairly short space of time, or some components of it, because I think that's also important. Like, does anyone know every component of React? Possibly. You know, there's probably some geniuses out there working for Facebook that maybe do, but I'd think it would be very rare that, you know, most React developers would know every component. They've probably focused in on certain elements of it. So again, to teach someone the 3 or 4 or 5 different components that you're using isn't teaching someone the entire React framework. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. And then, yeah, as ever with cloud technology, with testing tools, with methodologies, how long do you have to upskill that person? What's the end result you're looking for, and how quickly do you need to get to that end result? Because personally, I think there is always a compromise to be had.
Great.
Cool. So we'll run through these again. I know you guys have seen them quite a few times if you've tuned into the recent ones, but what version of JavaScript are they working with? If they're not working with a recent version, what have they done in their spare time to learn and keep up to date with it? Frameworks, what frameworks they're working with, and again, within that, okay, so how are you using React? What components of React are you using? And then talk them through how you're using React, get their opinion on that, and see if they have any experience with that, because as I said, using it as a blanket term is not, I think, the best way to do things. Testing, so again, do they test their own code, follow best practices? If so, how? Are they working in an agile environment? You know, we've touched on a few times, pretty much everyone is these days, but some companies take it more or less seriously. So I think it really comes down to how seriously your company takes it. I know we work with a few companies that, you know, it's super, super important for people to have extreme coding principles and things like that, extreme programming, sorry, and then databases. So, you know, again, can they add that complexity to the discussion? Have they worked with big data sets and things like that? Cool. And then just quickly, so again, cloud technology, regardless of whether they are a front-ender, back-ender, architect, whatever it is, that is the future of tech. So having any knowledge of cloud and DevOps is always going to be beneficial and kind of make a candidate stand out, I think. And then it depends what you're doing and depends what their responsibilities are, but, you know, looking at their design skills could definitely be useful as well. So with that, looking at and discussing past projects. Do they have an online portfolio? You know, back-end developers aren't going to. Not all front-end developers will, because they are fundamentally techies at the end of the day, not necessarily graphic designers, but some of them will have online portfolios and samples and things like that. So important to get a look at those. And do they understand kind of design principles? So they might not be a designer themselves, but do they understand why things are designed in certain ways?
So now we're going to talk through deconstructing experience and salary.
Lovely. Cool. So yeah, based on LinkedIn Talent Insights for the UK. So, you know, it's based on LinkedIn's data, which I think is probably the most complete data set you'll get. I still think it's an understatement, but it gives us some indication of how popular these frameworks are. So there actually wasn't information on Angular itself. There was only information on AngularJS for some reason. It wasn't in the skills and the talent insights. So maybe need to have a chat with our CSM there and find out why that is. But in terms of React, so 38,000 developers came up in the UK with React experience using talent insights, 34 with AngularJS. So we can see that it is starting to kind of add up and starting to pull away. Only 7 with Vue, which was pretty interesting, but I guess does go along with kind of what the market's saying. And then interestingly, so React was on par with Spring. I think there was a couple of hundred people in it. So yeah, really interesting to see that. Probably the 2 most comprehensive frameworks we've discussed so far have a very similar level of talent within them. And then .NET Core, which we haven't actually discussed in too much depth yet, is still way behind, which is interesting. Cool. And then some really good salary data here as well. I will share this in the Slack channel afterwards so everyone can have a quick look, but we can see here that React, so I ran it using React developer, Angular developer, and then just pure front-end developer without any skills. So we can see here that having React adds on average 12K to that standard front-end development skill set without any specific specialism. And even adds around 7.5 or so on Angular there as well. And I think, you know, to be honest, these do go with what we're seeing within the market. And then in terms of the split, so very, very marginally better than the industry average, but still, you know, as with all tech, still a huge job to do to try and make that a little bit more of an even split when it comes to gender. Lovely. And then just finally, so we've highlighted this a few times. So as you can see here, JS interestingly comes in behind C#. I know we've touched on the fact that C# is very popular in the north, but again, I do think this possibly comes down to how LinkedIn categorizes their data. But JS, according to LinkedIn anyway, is the 3rd most commonly used language within the UK. But other reports, I know Stack Overflow, argue that it is the most widely used worldwide anyway. So yeah, a little bit of conflict there, but I think what we can see is that JavaScript developers as a whole are a very available talent pool. Within those 139, only 38K on LinkedIn anyway have React as a skill. So you know, less than 40% of that overall total. So again, something to bear in mind, something to maybe discuss with your hiring managers if you are struggling. You know, can you look at talented JavaScript developers and upskill them on the components of React that your business is using? Great. And then I think this is our last slide actually. So yeah, just to reiterate the red flags. Really, you know, I don't want to seem like I'm saying these are negative. Like there are some amazing developers out there with Angular and TypeScript, amazing mobile devs with React Native, some great front enders that, you know, are experts in design and UI and wireframes as well. So it's about making sure you know what you're looking for and therefore what you're not necessarily looking for when it comes to kind of setting up your search. Great.
Cool.
I would throw some questions, but I think we've kind of got to the end. I don't think we have time to answer questions, unfortunately, now.
Or what we can do is if we get any through, Darren, we can post them in the Slack channel as well. I can't actually see the questions right now, but yeah, we can post a couple in there and see how we go.
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Well, thank you so much, Phil, for kind of taking us through React today. That was such a great session. Obviously, if anyone on the call has any questions at all, you can email us at hello@hackerjob.co and one of us will get back to you. And yeah, we've still got 3 more sessions to go, so super exciting. So thank you so much, Darren and Phil, for kind of putting this on today. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
See you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.